When Technics mentioned they've got a brand new set of headphones in form of the A800s, and they come in at £300 in the UK and $350 in the US, I was immediately intrigued. The reason behind that is because I wanted to know how it would compare with other flagship ANC headphones. And indeed in this review I'll be comparing it to a majority of its rivals. So to kick off this review I want to talk about connectivity, and the reason why is because these headphones, very much like their Sony alternatives, support the SBC, AAC and LDAC codecs, which is fantastic to see. Furthermore, they support multi-point and simultaneously can be used alongside LDAC. This means that you can connect to two different devices simultaneously and still benefit from the LDAC codec usage, which isn't the same that could be said about some of its competitors. Now with that aside, I also had no problems when it came to lip sync delays or video lag to my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, and furthermore I was also being able to utilize the LDAC codec given that I have a modern Android device. So with connectivity aside, what about when it comes to sound quality? Well, I should mention that these headphones have got impedance of 34 ohms, 40mm drivers and a frequency response quotation from Technics from 4Hz all the way to 40 kHz. Now in my sound quality assessments I use these with the LDAC codec while using Bluetooth of course and with ANC enabled. Now with the latter it does slightly affect the mid-bass, whereby it adds a little bit of extra pronounced mid-bass slam and does have a slight dip in terms of the lower mids, but you can EQ this, so do stay tuned for my own personalized EQ in the app section. So let me break it down in terms of the sound frequency range. First off, the sub-bass response, and here I was left very impressed. The music that you can get is very lively, you've got a good low-end extension, and it kept me excited when I was listening to DnB, EDM or R&B tracks. Now the same couldn't be quite said about the mid-bass response, and by that I mean that you still do have a very lively experience, however it does feel a little bit uncontrolled. It's wobbly and isn't as tight and pronounced in comparison to the likes of the Bose NC 700s or the likes of the Sony XM4s among many others. Here I just felt that the Technics have just gone a little bit overboard. Now while you can EQ this to a certain degree, it still does have that uncontrolled nature even if you were to dial down the mid-bass frequencies all the way down. And this just made me feel a little bit odd when I was listening back to my music, because I just knew how my bass was supposed to hit, but unfortunately that was not the case with the A800s. Now with that pronounced mid-bass tones, the lower mids do take an impact, and as I did mention with active noise cancellation, do take a further little dip. Nevertheless, you can EQ this to a certain degree, and while it will sound a little bit pushed back in comparison to the likes of the Sennheiser alternative, still these headphones have got a far more forward sound signature in comparison to the likes of the Bose NC 700s or even the Sony XM3 or XM4 headphones. What I'll say here is that Technics have really tried to bolster the mid-range, and while it's not quite class leading, it's still seriously impressive. The same could be said about the upper mids, whereby vocals come out really well, specifically if you're listening to female vocals. Here you'll be left with a smile on your face while listening back to the Technics A800s. As for the highs, they extend really well at the top end as well. They've got a nice sort of crystal type of sound, and they will give you that sort of lively nature. Specifically if you're listening to different instruments, so for example on classical music, you're going to be able to enjoy the cymbals just a little bit more. And furthermore, they're not also harsh or sibilant in the slightest at the top end, and therefore means that they don't give you any sort of ear fatigue, at least not for me, where my ears roll off at around 16 to 17 kHz. Now as for the Soundstage, it's got its pros and cons. Instrument separation and the overall width and depth is pretty good. In comparison to my Bose NC 700s, the Technics A800s do a far better job. However, the reverb and the overall accuracy, I would say, that the A800s reproduce is just odd to say the least. Now for those people who are just regular consumers and haven't owned more expensive headphones, then you might just feel that this is just what you should expect. For audiophiles out there, I think you will immediately pick up on the quite odd reverb, and you will find yourself a little bit baffled by the overall sound. Now you can get your head around it, but for someone like myself who would expect pinpoint accuracy and also not a little bit of an odd reverb, it just sounded odd. And as a result meant that I was left often a little bit confused when I was listening back to my music, and just made that the overall sound that I was getting not quite accurate to what I would expect from the set of bookshelf speakers which are positioned behind me, from my audiophile wired headphones connected over to my pretty expensive DAC, or in comparison to other over-the-ear ANC headphones that are out there on the market. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say over here is that Technics A800 had a slight sort of reverb sound, and as a result just left me disheartened.
So what about when it comes to recording quality? Well, everything you can hear right now is coming directly from the Technics headphones and with the beamforming technology enabled. Now, what I'm really impressed by this is that it really focuses on my voice. To demonstrate this, I'm going to play back my friend's track. It's from Priya J, and it's playing through my bookshelf speakers at a set volume. We're not going to change this throughout the test. I'm going to go quiet. Now, what's really impressive there is that it actually focuses on my voice, and even when I face away from my bookshelf speakers, in other words, where the microphones would be positioned towards the front, the headphones actually still focus on my voice and give you a completely quiet and serene environment, which is great for your recipients. So now we're going to disable the technology so that you can actually see for yourself the differences between the two. So now we have the technology disabled, and you'll be able to pick up that my voice comes out just a little bit clearer, and indeed the voice quality is better. However, when we're faced with a noisy environment, suddenly you'll be able to hear Priya's vocals a lot more than my own voice, which is not exactly recommended. Specifically, when I am not talking, you'll be able to hear Priya's voice a lot more than with the technology enabled. So ultimately, if you want the best overall call quality, then you'll want to disable the technology, but in most real life scenarios, you'll want to have it enabled, and therefore the technology that Technics actually offers is seriously impressive. Now, just as a reference, here are the Bose NC 700s, which I often use as a reference point. And what I will say over here is that the Bose headphones still reign supreme, be it in a quiet environment or when you're faced with some environmental sounds, such as Priya's vocals yet again. The Bose NC 700 still focus on my voice. So it's definitely applaudable for what Technics have been able to achieve, but don't dethrone the NC 700 when it comes to the call quality department.
So with the recording quality out of the way, what about when it comes to active noise cancellation? Well, here I was left pleasantly surprised by the Technics A800s. Indeed, here they competed with the likes of the Bose NC 700s in the low-end tones, whereby if you have, let's say, a solid airplane kind of whooshing sound, this noise was actually cancelled out extremely well, and in some ways better in the A800s in comparison to the NC 700s from Bose. However, when it comes to a little bit more challenging type of environments, whereby you've got, let's say, people talking, or let's say a bike going by, or a car going by, or bus or train, here I feel that these headphones can't compete with the likes of the Nuraphone headphones, nor can they compete with the likes of the Sony XM3s, which are still class leading if you want a real complete isolation from the exterior noise. Here the Technics A800s don't do a bad job, don't get me wrong, but they just can't quite compete with those flagship top tier ANC headphones, which do a better job in that department. Now, moving on to the app, through the home screen you can adjust the name, you can change the battery level, and also you can customize the noise cancellation level, the ambient sound level. So yes, indeed, you have got a transparency mode, and which you can also adjust in between transparency and attention if you so wish. And of course you can fully disable it if you want as well. Now, you have got an equalizer, which I did reference before, and here you can see my own settings. Now, of course your hearing will be different from mine, so I will encourage you to play around with the settings for yourself in order to find the right balance. Of course you can go through the preset ones or completely disable it, but I do think a bit of customization does go a long way. Now, as for the call quality test, this is where you have the beamforming technology, which you can enable or disable. You'll just just have to tap it on, it will switch it on with the headphone, and then you can even have an active test whereby you can start talking and it will pick up in terms of waveforms, which I just find quite intriguing. Now at the bottom you do have some quick access menus, and then you've got the settings. The voice prompt you can change in terms of the language, the headphone name, the body color, and you can add other headphones from the Technics range. As for the auto power off, you can have it on or off in terms of the feature, which is quite handy. And then going back, you can also go for the headphone fitting sensor. Now in my case I have it disabled, but if you want to have it enabled you can do so, whereby you can have music continuing playing or let's say pausing, and the same goes with the touch operations. That's quite nice because for those people who are frequently getting their headphones on and off. You got the Bluetooth blinking LEDs which you can enable or disable. I suspect most people will have that disabled. As for the connection mode, you'll definitely want to enable LDAC through here and also through your Bluetooth menu, at least if you do have access to the highest quality Bluetooth codec. And then as for the suppression of sound, you'll probably want to leave this on auto, but of course if you do have some issues when it comes to lip sync delays or video lag, you might want to go through one of these settings. As I did mention before, I had no problems whatsoever. Multi-point can also be enabled through this mode, and as I did mention before, you will have no problems running this simultaneously with LDAC, which is great to see. Now as for the touch sensors, you can adjust the double tap and triple tap function. As you can see over here, you can adjust it on the side of general operations and also telephone. Now what I will say here is the touch operations actually work pretty well. I had no issues whatsoever when it comes to using it. My only complaint however is that the customization as to what you get through the app is somewhat limited, whereby you can go through the different ambient sounds and also just turn it off or have no functions. Other than that, it just has no limiting functions. In other words, you don't have media controls. Now the reason behind that is because you've actually got media controls on one of the cups anyway, so therefore you can go play, pause, you can also double tap or triple tap in order to go previous and next, and also you've got physical volume controls. So that's potentially why Technics have not given you the ability to use touch-based sensitivity controls for media controls, but nevertheless it would have been potentially nice to see the manufacturer offer it at least as an option for those people who just don't want to press those physical buttons. Now as for the touch noise settings, for the noise cancellation settings, you can enable or disable certain settings, so therefore you can toggle through all three modes if you so wish, or go through only two of them. As for the ambient mode setting, this is the same one that we did mention before. As for optimizing noise cancellation, you can customize this as to how you want the noise cancellation to operate. In its default state, I actually found it to be the best. You'll definitely want to perform this test if you have the headphones in a noisy environment or somewhere that you would normally accustomed to have noise cancellation enabled. So for example, if you're on the tube, and therefore give you a better indication of how the noise cancellation operates. As I did mention, the noise cancellation is pretty good on these headphones. Now as for the level of background noise, I think normal will suffice for most people, but if you do want that extra bit of noise reduction, you can go on the strong mode, and this does work simultaneously alongside the other mode that I mentioned before with the beamforming technology. Now it does have built-in Amazon Alexa in terms of voice assistant, and you can also use the voice assistant on your smartphone such as Google Assistant or Siri, or in my case I don't use them, so I have them fully disabled. Now moving on, I should mention the overall battery life of these headphones is really impressive. With LDAC enabled, you can get up to 40 hours of playback, and that's with active noise cancellation enabled. If you were to disable active noise cancellation, you can get 50 hours, and in fact if you disable LDAC and go to AAC instead, you can get up to 60 hours with active noise cancellation disabled, which is seriously impressive. Now these headphones also have quick charging functionalities via the USB Type-C port, and therefore after about 15 minutes of charge, you'll get roughly 10 hours of playback, which is absolutely insane. Now as for the headphones themselves, it should be worth bearing in mind that you do have a 3.5mm jack, and that jack does disable Bluetooth as soon as you use it, so that's worth bearing in mind. And likewise the USB Type-C charging port, which basically means that you can't charge and use the headphones simultaneously. Nevertheless, given the long battery life of the headphones, I think this will be a non-issue, but it's just something I thought to point out in my review. Now moving on to comfort, the headphones weigh 298 grams and also have got a soft inner headband design and quite cushiony soft ear pads, which meant that in terms of longer listening sessions I had no problems even when I was wearing my reading glasses. I should also point out that the headphone clamp is optimized pretty well, at least in my opinion and for my head shape of course. Here I had no problems when it came to listening to them at home or taking them on the go, for example for a light jog, whereby I didn't feel that the headphones would fall off my ears, whereas some of its competitors either have a too strong of a headphone clamp and or too weak of a headphone clamp, so this feels like a good in between. Elsewhere, the headphones have got a foldable design both inwards and sidewards, which makes it handy if you want to place them on their own within a bag or a large size pocket of sorts, but of course they come with a hard shell carrying case, which makes it all that bit better when it comes to portability. And so this brings me on to my verdict, and on the whole the Technics A800s are not bad inclusions to the ANC market. However, they do have a slight odd reverb, which will put off some audiophiles, and as a result those people might want to look at the Sennheiser alternative. Also, in terms of the price, they don't come in cheap at £300 in the UK and $350 in the US, at least at the time of filming. That's almost double the price of the Sony XM3 and Jabra alternatives. Elsewhere, you've got the Sony XM4s and the Bose NC 700s, which still come out a little bit cheaper, and all while not having the same sort of all-round sound signature, they're still fantastic alternatives. Ultimately, what I'm trying to convey over here is that the Technics A800s are just too expensive to recommend, and given their slight odd reverb, I just can't see myself recommending them even for those people who have the money and are just massive audiophiles. So I'll just be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the A800s down in the comments section below, and of course if you like this independent detailed review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.